In my capacity as a director and as an acting coach, there's a phrase that I often say to my students. You cannot act what you do not understand. You cannot bring to character what you yourself have possibly refused to acknowledge exists inside of you. Great acting, in many, many ways, is the craft of self-knowledge, self-awareness, self-acceptance. And in the real world, as human beings, we struggle with that, don't we? We struggle with what it means to be in a practice of self-acceptance. Now, self-acceptance, that sounds romantic, doesn't it? And human beings, we romanticize far too much. Self-acceptance does not mean that I like everything. Not at all. I don't have to like everything, but I must understand it. Self-esteem, self-worth, self-value, these are not meant to be optimal things all the time. To be a functional human in the world is to understand that you have both light and shadow attributes to you. And to be in denial about that can make you potentially dangerous, both to yourself and to the people around you. To know ourselves, to explore what it means, to understand our shadow, which doesn't mean negative. Shadow simply means it's in the shadow, it's unknown to you. I believe it was Jung who said that until we make the subconscious conscious, it will rule our lives and we will call it fate. And in the work that I've been doing with a lot of my clients lately is exactly that, making the unconscious world conscious. In our work as human beings and in our constant interactions with one another, we don't always realize, but we are always operating from an unconscious space. We are always operating from a conditioned mind. Healing, big word, healing often has a lot to do with confronting your conditioning and starting to unravel and untangle the bits that do not serve you, that have nothing to do with where you are at this phase of your life. So this has been coming up constantly in a lot of my sessions, a lot of my coaching sessions, because human existentialism is a part of being alive. Wondering about what are we here for, why are we here, who are we meant to interact with and why. Do we have to subscribe to every single system that's been taught to us? Do we have to believe in absolutely every single thing? For example, I sometimes tease my students and my clients. I'll say, Disney kind of did a number on us. And you don't have to subscribe to this idea of happily ever after. In fact, the more you try and do that, chances are the less happy you'll be. That's a conversation for another day. I wanted to do this video to discuss motive, to discuss objective, and hopefully shed a light on why as human beings do we find these parts of ourselves so difficult to navigate. In my experience as a coach, I think one of the primary reasons that we struggle with ourselves is because we all have that inbuilt inner critic, the ego. And that voice is constantly comparing and criticizing and judging and in a constant state of anxiety and stress, always panicked about the past and worried about the future. This voice exists in all of us, and until we learn how to identify that voice, learn that there are other voices also inside of us that we could be paying attention to that aren't that critical one, the more we learn who and what we are, the better quality existence we offer ourselves. No human being walks this planet without having experienced some sort of pain or trauma or difficulty. Where they land on the spectrum, of course, is an entirely different conversation. Does one land more on the empathic, codependent side of the spectrum with that trauma, or does one land on the more narcissistic, cluster B, pathological, narcissistic side of the spectrum? Because as human beings, we are all on that spectrum. And it's important to understand yourself so that you are also able to understand the people around you better. In the work that I have done with all of my students and my clients, whenever we start fresh, is we start on the self, because I want you to understand who you are. I want you to understand how you are made. I want you to understand why you have that internal dialogue. Often I call it a sort of going to war with yourself, feeling, sensation, and dialogue and diatribe that's constant, before we start getting into how you take the teachings, the learnings, the practices, or the skills into your professional life, into your interpersonal dynamics. Whether you are an artist or not, it doesn't matter. My approach is pretty much the same, because I put all human beings onto the same playing field. I do believe that as humans, we have a long way to go in terms of understanding who we are, what we are, why we value what we value. We are living in a particularly difficult and challenging time, and people don't want to admit this, but they are struggling with their emotional intensities. They are struggling trying to understand and make room for the parts of them that are judging or condemning their experience, especially of late. Perhaps this is something that you relate to. Perhaps this is something that has been gnawing at you for quite some time. And if it is, I would like to make myself available to you as a coach and somebody who has walked it. I know what it is to lose sleep and passion and inspiration and go into very dark spaces of criticism where you really do genuinely feel as if you are quite alone, that nobody can understand the depth of your pain. And I want you to know that that's not true. If you can hear me in this moment saying to you, that is not true. But your ego and your conditioning and your interpretation or perceptions are lying to you. You don't have to have such a dark experience on this planet. Earth is hard, make no mistake. Earth is very difficult, but it doesn't have to be made additionally difficult by your internal makeup, your internal programming, your self-talk, if you like to think of it that way. Well, I think that's a good place to end this particular video. I will do a series of more videos because that is the way of the world. And I'm getting on board. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you for listening to this. And I look forward to potentially meeting and working with you.